My son called me trash after I spent years scrubbing toilets just to give him a good life. He sees me as weak, just an old mother who can be tossed aside like a worn-out rag. He stood on stage, glowing under the spotlight. I stood in the back, quietly wiping stains no one cared to notice. They never said my name, but I wasn't beneath him, I was his mother. And what he never expected was that the very person he once looked down on would be the one to help me rise again. No revenge, just truth. I used to believe that light was where art was born, that it was where dreams found a home. Maybe because I loved a dancer, Jules. Every spin of his lit up the stage like a sunrise. I was the one who wiped the sweat from his brow after every show. And when he fell his final collapse on stage, I stayed behind. For Adrian. For the past 30 years, these hands have cleaned countless dressing rooms, polished endless stage floors across Los Angeles. I used to think light would save us. But now I know light can betray too. Before I share the full story, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from and what time is it where you are? I just want to know I'm not alone in this. And if what you hear moves you, please consider subscribing. It helps more people understand the truth about elder abuse. Now let me tell you what really happened. My name is Elise Laurent, French by birth, now just a fading echo of a name in a foreign land. I came here 30 years ago with my husband, Jules. He danced like life itself was a passionate flamenco, and I was the one who wiped the sweat from his brow after every performance. When Jules died from a tragic fall on stage one, he never rose from, I stayed. Because of Adrian Laurent, our only son. He was born with a kind of presence you can't teach, a posture that made people look up, no matter where he stood. I did everything to get him into the arts. I washed laundry, scrubbed floors, cleaned dishes, and even slept in our car on nights we couldn't afford rent. I believed if the spotlight had once loved Jules, it would one day love Adrian too, and it did. Adrian is now Hollywood's newest rising star. He graces magazine covers like he was born for them, hair slicked back perfectly, a smile worth millions. His name, Adrian Laurent, flashes across the biggest LED billboard on Sunset Boulevard. As for mine, Elise, if anyone remembers it at all, it's only as that frail old woman who quietly sits outside the studio gates holding a tin lunchbox, eyes searching for a glimpse of her son from afar. I never meant to see him like that, not like that. But that morning, that fateful morning, I got the eviction notice. My tiny subsidized apartment, the place I'd called home for over a decade, was no longer eligible to house me. 3 days. They gave me exactly 3 days to disappear. I went to the housing office. I called a few old contacts people whose studios I once kept spotless. But no one had space for a washed-up old woman. I had no savings left, no one to turn to. Except Adrian. They said he was filming a big-budget action movie that day, right in the heart of downtown. The whole place was swarming with media. I knew I wasn't allowed in, no pass, no invitation. But I've lived a lifetime backstage. I know the paths of the invisible. I slipped past the equipment trucks, dodged security. And then I saw him, my Adrian, in a designer suit, hair slicked just right, standing beside the director like a cinematic god. I called his name. Once, then again. I remember stepping across the line onto the set like someone walking into battle, and suddenly every camera, every lens, every eye turned toward me. Adrian, it's me, your mother. I said, my voice trembling, trying not to cry. He turned around. At first, his eyes widened with surprise. I recognized that look. It was the same one he used to give me as a little boy running into my arms after school. But then his expression closed, like a door being locked from the inside. What are you doing here? His voice was ice. You couldn't wait until I was done. I reached for his hand. Son, I don't have a home anymore. They're evicting me. I need a little help. I don't know who else to turn to. He pulled his hand back like I'd burned him. I heard the clicks of cameras, murmurs from reporters. Please, don't make a scene. Adrian hissed through clenched teeth eyes, scanning the crowd. You're embarrassing me. I felt the blood freeze in my veins, not because of his words, but because of his eyes. He looked at me like I was a stranger, like a beggar on the street, as if 30 years of my life were just a glitch in his success story. He reached into his wallet, pulled out a $50 bill, Here, take this, get a ride home. I stood there, the trembling bill still in my hand. I don't even remember how I walked off that set. Just flashes someone taking a photo, a reporter maybe, or just a curious stranger. The flash went off light again, but this time it didn't save me, it swallowed me whole. 3 hours later, the video hit the internet. Hollywood star Adrien Laurent rejects his own mother on set, a clickbait headline. I became news, not because of talent, not because of my story, but because of a moment of rejection. The light I once believed in now, it shined on me like a wound. I had no home, no son, no dreams left, but I still had a voice. And this story is mine, because only when the light betrays you do you truly see the depth of the darkness. And in that darkness, sometimes, just sometimes, you find yourself again. I remember those early days, not as Adrienne Laurent's mother on the headlines or in whispered gossip, but simply as a mother trying to survive in a vast, cold city. We started our life in the Bronx, a tiny apartment where the sound of ambulance sirens never stopped and the smell of fried food hung in every hallway. I worked 2 shifts a day, mornings cleaning a small Broadway theater, nights scrubbing restrooms at a film studio just to make ends meet. I still remember the exhaustion, the ache in my legs, my back bent from hours of sweeping. But every time I came home, all the pain vanished the moment I saw Adrian, curly-haired sitting at his tiny desk, eyes glowing as he read a new monologue or practiced the same dance moves I once learned with Jules. That boy was my entire world. I saved every dollar I could and wrote countless letters to art schools begging them to see the talent and passion in my son. Every letter I sent was a spark of hope in a long, lonely night. Sometimes they were scholarship applications, sometimes just permission to audit a class. Each letter was carefully marked, paying in installments, because I couldn't afford it all at once. I scraped it together, shift by shift, dollar by dollar. Adrian failed many times. I remember his first school performance, blinding stage lights, and he forgot all his lines. I was the only one in the back row clapping loud enough for him to hear that his mother was still there. Not judging, not walking out, not giving up. I remember him coming to me once, tears streaming down his face, saying, "I want to quit." I didn't lecture him. I just hugged him tight and said, "You only learn how strong you are when you choose to stand back up." I never taught him with words. I taught him through the weight of my persistence. I turned down every offer to remarry, no matter how tired, how lonely I felt, because I knew if I married again, Adrian would lose part of me. He wouldn't get all my time, all my love. So I chose solitude. I chose to remain behind the scenes, dusting off the stage, cleaning up footprints he would one day leave. I'm not the hero of this story. There were no spotlights on me, no applause, just shadows, a quiet presence, a steady hand that kept his little flame from ever burning out. And now, when my son stands tall in the full glare of the spotlight, I have become invisible. That feeling, it's like a wound that runs deep into my soul. But it's also a reminder that even when forgotten, I am still a mother, a woman who gave everything just to see her child move forward. I wonder, does Adrian remember those sleepless nights when I sat by the window dreaming of his future success? Or does he only see an old woman now, frail, useless, inconvenient? When the light shines on that man, I am just a shadow, just trash, something to be thrown away. But I will not disappear, because in this darkness, a quiet fire still burns, the fire of motherhood, of endurance, of sacrifice without applause, and no matter how far he turns from me, I will always be the first to stand when he falls. That very night, the clip of my son Adrian rejecting me in front of countless cameras, tossing a $50 bill at me like I was some disposable thing, did more than break my heart. It went viral, like a wildfire across social media so fast, I didn't even have time to brace for it. That day before I could even pack my small suitcase, my phone started vibrating nonstop, messages, calls, comments, some angry, some supportive, some cruel. But overwhelmingly, people stood with me. The hashtag #NockOurJustice For Elise began trending across every platform. Strangers, people who had never met me or Adrian, rose up in my defense. They didn't see a tired old woman dragging herself through life. They saw a mother, a symbol of sacrifice, of unconditional love that couldn't be bought or erased. I never imagined a single video could shake my entire world like that. In just one night, the quiet, aging apartment I lived in, always so still, like a weary pause in a long song, became the center of a media storm. Reporters swarmed the building, camera crews set up outside the gate, microphones pointed at my window. Some days I couldn't even leave to buy milk or bread without being photographed, questioned, treated like I'd stepped straight off the front page. "Mrs. Elise, are you really Adrian's biological mother? Are you just using his fame for attention? Can you tell us what really happened on set that day?" At first, I avoided them. Sometimes I just pulled the curtains shut. One time, a frantic reporter knocked on my door nonstop for nearly an hour. I sat in the dark, hands clenched together, my heart in knots. I didn't know what scared me more, being hurt again or having to relive a story I'd spent my whole life surviving. Then one day, while I was replanting some wilted flowers on the balcony, a young woman approached me. No cameras, no mic, just a small notebook and an honest look in her eyes. "My name is Mia," she said. "I was at the set that day. I saw everything. I'm not here for a scoop. I just want to listen." I looked at her for a long time. Maybe the me from 10 years ago would have invited her in, brewed some tea, and told her everything. But that day, I simply shook my head. "You came at the wrong time, Mia," I said gently. "Today, I'm not ready to tell that story, not because I'm angry, but because some wounds are better left undisturbed." Mia didn't push. She nodded, stepped back, and walked away quietly. Maybe she understood, or at least respected my right to silence something most of the world had forgotten. But my silence couldn't stop the storm. I began receiving letters from everywhere, shaky handwriting from elderly mothers, short messages from students, nurses, factory workers, ordinary people whose hearts all beat the same message: "I understand you." I've been Adrian. I've been Elise. I never saw myself as special, just an old woman who'd lived in the shadows for too long. But for the first time in years, light touched me, not the blinding kind that exposes your shame, but a gentle human warmth from strangers I'd never met. And Adrian. His career started to spiral. Brands pulled their contracts. Directors removed his name from film projects. The world began to ask, how can someone rise so high and forget where they came from? But I didn't gloat. I didn't want to see my son fail. I just hoped one day he'd turn around and see me, not as a burden that once slowed him down, but as a person, a mother. I can't rewrite the past. I can't force my son to love me, but I can hold on to the truth. And if light once betrayed me, then maybe now, through kind strangers, it was also the light that brought me back from being forgotten. I locked my door, drew the curtains, turned off the phone. Exclusive interview offers, talk show invitations, high-paying deals to share my truth. I refuse them all, not out of pride, but because my pain is not a product to sell, not something to be packaged and displayed under pitying eyes or curious lenses. It is not a primetime segment. It's 30 years of quiet loneliness. Every coin I scraped together in a powdered milk can. Every night shift, scrubbing Broadway toilets so my son could rehearse in shoes that didn't fall apart. I thought the media would move on, that after a few noisy days, they'd chase another scandal like they always do. I even hoped Adrian would stay silent, because silence at the very least leaves space for dignity. But no, 1 week later, I saw his face on TV, flawless under studio lights, polished smile, legs crossed confidently on a leather chair, laughing softly when the host asked about the woman in that clip. "I don't know who she is," Adrian said. "Maybe just some crazy person stalking me. My mother died when I was a kid." He said that, in front of millions. Not a blink, not a pause to swallow the lie, not a flicker of doubt on his face, just an actor playing his role too well. I sat there, hands resting on my lap, not angry, just hollow. A quiet part of me shattered. not because he rejected me, but because he erased me, like deleting a misplaced line from a script. That's when I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. Not for revenge. I had no desire to take revenge on my son, the same boy I once cradled in my arms, singing softly to in French whenever he had a fever. I wasn't looking to set the record straight for myself. I wanted to give a voice to those who've lived their whole lives unheard, to the silent mothers who gave up their youth to nurture someone else's dreams, only to be treated as a bad memory to be erased. So I said yes. I agreed to appear on the biggest talk show in America, broadcast live during prime time. People called it a media victory, said I was going to make Adrian pay, but I didn't see it that way. For me, it was a release not for the world, but for myself. The show was filmed in New York, where I spent nearly 30 years in a worn-down Bronx apartment, where Adrian grew up surrounded by the smell of bleach water and the distant hum of Broadway musicals. I arrived at the studio wearing an old gray dress, not because I had no other options, but because I wanted to hold on to who I was. I didn't step onto that stage as a victim, I came as a witness. The studio lights no longer scared me, they looked at me and I looked right back. I spoke. Not with tears, but with memory. I told them about our first winter in America, how Adrian and I burned candles to stay warm in a room with no heat, how I'd leave him a piece of bread and a note on the kitchen table each morning, then go work 14 hours without even kissing him goodbye. I spoke of the letters I wrote to art schools in broken English. I learned from old flyers and a kind Chinese woman at the laundromat. I told them about the time Adrian landed a small role in a school play, shaking with fear, and how I was the only one clapping when he forgot his lines. I also shared the time I turned down a marriage proposal, the only man who'd loved me after my husband passed. I told him no, because I knew Adrian would lose focus. I chose to be a mother, not a woman. My voice grew steadier as I spoke, and when I finished, I looked straight into the camera, not to send a message, but to tell the truth. My son may have forgotten me, but I cannot forget the years I lived for him. I'm not here asking for pity or trying to fix my image. I stand here for the nameless mothers, those without faces or voices yet always present. And this time, I will not stay silent. The room fell silent, no applause at first, just a long suspended stillness like all the air had been pulled from the studio. Then slowly, applause, soft at first, then louder, stronger. Some cried, some stood. But I didn't cry. I had cried enough for one lifetime. After the broadcast, I returned to my apartment, a small corner the world had always overlooked. But now letters began to arrive, from other mothers, from children who had once abandoned theirs, from strangers who had never met me but saw themselves in the story I told. Shaky handwriting, typos everywhere, but more sincere than any contract I'd ever scrubbed off a studio desk. Within days, Adrian's world began to collapse. One by one, his lucrative endorsement deals were canceled. Brands didn't want to be associated with someone the public was now fiercely condemning. Movie producers didn't stay silent either. They quietly pulled his name from Oscars consideration. They distanced themselves from the scandal that was now unraveling before the world. Acting contracts, interview invitations, marketing campaigns, all vanished. His carefully built career over a decade in the making had crumbled into pieces scattered between fame and disgrace. Soon after, the media started digging into his past. Old stories resurfaced, abuse of power, rude behavior toward castmates, ignoring ethical standards, even accusations long buried by money and influence came crawling back into the light. People he'd once worked with began to speak out, describing an Adrian who was arrogant, entitled, and living in a world where he believed he was untouchable. The public no longer saw the bright star they once admired. Now they saw a fractured man hiding behind a carefully polished mask of media and privilege. But I didn't take pleasure in his downfall. No mother truly wants to see her child fall into the abyss. What I felt was something deeper, a heavier sorrow. The sorrow of a mother who once rocked that boy to sleep, who raised him with nothing but love and belief, and watched him choose lies to climb higher, only to drag himself back down from the very peak. I don't blame anyone, only myself, for staying silent too long, for believing love alone could heal everything. But I now know this was the only way the truth could be seen. No truth stays buried forever. I didn't speak to destroy him. I didn't come with violence. I didn't want to ruin my son. I only wanted to face the truth, a sharper blade than any knife. I spoke not to condemn Adrian, but to wake him up, to shake him from the dream of fame that's slowly erasing the man he really is. I thought everything would end there, but I was wrong. Just a few days later, Adrian showed up at my doorstep. No warning, no apology. He stood there, his face cold, his eyes burning with a restrained fury. "You ruined everything," he said. His voice cracked not from emotion, but from rage. "My career, my future, all of it destroyed over some story no one can even verify." I said nothing, because I knew to Adrian losing the spotlight was like losing the right to breathe. He no longer saw me as his mother, only as a traitor, but I never expected him to strike back so cruelly. A week later, I received a court summons. Adrian had officially filed a lawsuit against me, accusing me of defamation of revealing private information without consent. He hired a powerful legal team, clearly intending to silence me through the law. Then he came back in person, not to reconcile, but to hand me a contract. "Just sign this," he said, placing the document on the table, his tone flat like he was closing a business deal. "It'll all go away. I'll drop the lawsuit. You'll get enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life. But from now on, you are no longer the mother of Adrienne Laurent. No interviews, no books, no public mention of my name, nothing." I picked up the paper. The words on the page felt like knives. From this point forward, the two parties no longer share any legal familial connection. All rights and responsibilities are hereby terminated. Both parties agree to stay out of each other's lives in every form. He had prepared everything, every clause meticulously written, like I was just another item he needed removed from his world. "You really think money will silence me?" I asked, my hand trembling. "Not money," he replied. "Reputation. You don't need it. I do." I looked at my son, not the man on the red carpet lit by flashbulbs, but the little boy who once cried when he scraped his knee, the child who used to cling to me during thunderstorms, and I realized I hadn't lost him to fame. I'd lost him to the darkness that fame invited in. I didn't sign the contract. I couldn't disown the child I'd carried, raised, and loved, even if he now rejected everything I had ever given him. Instead, I hired a lawyer, not because I wanted to win some legal battle, but because I needed to defend the truth, the only thing I still had left to stand on. We began gathering evidence, old emails, voice recordings, handwritten letters from the early years of Adrian's career moments he had shared with me in vulnerability, confessions from when he felt lost. I wasn't digging for dirt. I wasn't trying to humiliate him. I just needed to prove that nothing I said had been fabricated, that I wasn't defaming him. I was telling a truth that had been buried too long. The trial was tense. Reporters flooded the courtroom. Seats were packed. I sat there, hands steady, spine straight, eyes unwavering. Across from me sat Adrian, still my son, but now a stranger I barely recognized. I didn't cry, not because I was strong, but because I had no tears left to give. In the end, the court ruled in my favor. They found that I hadn't lied, that I had every right to share my story, that I hadn't defamed anyone but had spoken the truth. I didn't feel victorious, only empty, because sometimes justice doesn't bring freedom. It brings a loss you can never reclaim. One autumn afternoon, as golden leaves scattered across the sidewalk, there was a knock on my door. I didn't expect it to be Adrian, my son, the one I thought I'd lost in a sea of strangers. His eyes flickered with something that looked like pain, but rage quickly took over. "This was all a media stunt," he shouted, his voice shaking the walls. "You used everything, the story, the attention to make yourself famous. You act like you're the only one who sacrificed. I worked just as hard to succeed." I looked at him. I didn't respond. No anger, just quiet resolve. Because I knew his words weren't truth. They were pain, the desperation of a man trapped between the light and the shadows. And no matter how much I hurt, I couldn't return that pain with cruelty. We stood there face to face, a mother wounded but still standing, a son unraveling under the weight of emotions he didn't know how to carry. I wanted to tell him that love isn't about money. It's about understanding, about being seen, about being heard. But before I could say a word, Adrian turned around and walked away, leaving me in the quiet of my small room once more. After the storm had passed, someone I had never met before, a young independent filmmaker named Marie, came to find me. She told me she had followed my story online and was deeply moved by the resilience, the quiet sacrifice, and the pain I had endured all those years. Marie invited me to star in a short film she was creating. It was about a forgotten mother in modern society, about the women who stand silently behind the success of their children and the heartbreak that comes when those very children turn their backs on them. At first, I declined. I didn't want to be in the spotlight again. I didn't want to relive the pain. I didn't want my life to become a spectacle for others to consume. But after much thought, I realized this wasn't an opportunity to become famous. This was an opportunity to tell my story, not just for myself, but for all the invisible mothers out there, the ones who sacrifice quietly, without recognition, without applause. So I said yes. Filming was not easy. Every scene forced me to face old memories, unfinished dreams, and unspoken sacrifices. But in those moments, I also found a new kind of strength, a quiet determination to keep going. The short film was called Darkness and Light. It mirrored my life, sometimes the shadowed mother in the background, sometimes the strong woman who stood up to face the world. The day the film was selected to screen at the Sundance Film Festival, one of the most prestigious stages for independent cinema, was a day I will never forget. A vast auditorium, lights dimmed over the big screen, ordinary yet powerful images flickered across the frame. My story through Marie's lens, soft gasps, silent tears, applause swelling like a symphony of empathy and understanding. The screening ended in a standing ovation. My story of a mother who dared to speak after years of silence had reached hundreds of hearts in that room. Old footage, buried memories, all the pain, the loss. They came rushing back into that space. When I walked on stage to accept the honorary award, the spotlight hit me, and I thought nothing could move my heart more than this moment. But then I saw him, Adrian, standing quietly in the back of the auditorium. He didn't say a word, just sat there motionless throughout the screening, like a ghost among the crowd. And when the old footage played me younger, him smaller, those moments only the two of us had once shared, I saw him wipe away tears. Not tears for a lost career, but for lost time, for the mother he had once turned away from. At that very moment, when the entire room was still suspended in emotion, a little girl no more than 10 stepped quietly onto the stage. She held a small bouquet, wrapped with care and love. Looking up at me, her bright eyes shining under the lights, she said softly, "You showed me that my mom isn't useless." I stood still for a moment, not from surprise, but because her words pierced my heart like an arrow. They hurt and healed all at once. I bent down, took the flowers from her small hands, looked into her eyes for a long moment, and simply nodded, smiling through the silence. No other words were needed. A few days later, I began receiving hundreds of letters, messages from around the world, from mothers who felt forgotten, from children who regretted never understanding their parents, from people who had lived with hidden pain for far too long. They told me that my story made them feel seen, heard, less alone. Each message was an echo of abandoned love, and also a quiet resurrection of bonds once thought broken beyond repair. Among those messages, there was one letter from Adrian, no apology, no excuses. It was just a letter, a long, handwritten one, as if he needed time for each word to break through layers of pride and shame. Adrian wrote about how he had lived in a world where applause was an addiction, where every mistake was cleaned up by someone else, and where love was replaced with validation. He said he wasn't writing to reclaim his public image because he knew he had already lost that. He just wanted to understand once and for all the mother he had left behind in his endless pursuit of the spotlight. I read that letter many times, each time a small part of my heart softened. No, it wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was the first time I felt Adrian speaking. From truth, not fear, not pride. A door had opened, even if only slightly in his heart and in mine. The road ahead would still be long. But at least we had turned back toward each other. I quietly folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Then I stepped out onto the balcony, the soft glow of sunset warming my face. A faint smile appeared. I didn't know what the future would bring, but I knew I had won something far greater. I had conquered the darkness of the past with the light of truth. And in this vast world, I had finally found a place to belong, a story to tell, and a heart that never stopped loving. A year passed. The once blazing spotlight around Adrian faded. Hollywood is unforgiving when it comes to scandal and truth, and no matter who you are, that light eventually dims if it's not grounded in something real. One autumn afternoon, as a chilly breeze swept through the familiar streets, I received another handwritten letter, simple yet far deeper than any public apology ever could be. It was from Adrian. Enclosed was an old handkerchief, the one I used to wipe sweat from his and his father's brow. I was stunned. He had kept it. There were no apologies, no promises, just a memory. He wrote about the first time he stepped onto a stage, nervously peeking out from behind the curtains, searching for me in the shadows. And I was there. I had always been there. Though I said nothing, my gaze never left him, a silent lifeline in a sea of chaos and pressure. He remembered, and I knew. That part of us had never been lost. Maybe no matter how far we drifted, we were still mother and son, torn by pain but bound by something unbreakable. I pinned his letter next to a shadow box on my wall, the same box that held the $50 bill Adrian once threw into my hands, a relic of pain, of abandonment, of the day I was treated like I didn't exist. But I didn't keep it as a scar, I turned it into a symbol. When someone throws money in your face, I once said, you can lower your head and pick it up or lift your head and make it mean something. I chose to lift my head. The day I received the award for Best Actress for my debut film, I walked onto the stage. The lights were blinding. Applause thundered through the room. But what moved me most wasn't the recognition. It was the moment I stood there, not as a forgotten mother in the shadows, but as a woman standing fully in her own light. As I held the heavy trophy in my hand, Adrian stepped forward. No spotlight, no fanfare. He said nothing. He simply bowed deep and sincere before the entire auditorium. A simple gesture, but in that silence, there was everything: remorse, humility, an apology too deep for words. The room went quiet. I looked at him, didn't move, didn't embrace him. I just nodded, a small nod, but enough to break the hearts of everyone watching. A moment without a script, but one that held a lifetime. In that moment, I reclaimed myself, not as a castaway shadow, but as light, as a storyteller, as the voice of every invisible mother. I looked straight into the camera, into the homes of millions watching, and said, I'm not the woman behind the spotlight. I am the light. That wasn't just my line. It was the voice of every mother, every woman, every forgotten soul in this world. We are not behind the story. We are the story. And just like that, I, Elise Laurent, was no longer the faded shadow of the past, but the storyteller, the light bearer, lit not by fame, but by truth, by love, and by the life I had lived.